Now I'll be using user-based managed identity to make sure that the Azure public VM or the Azure VM is able to upload files to the storage account. But this time we'll not be using the SAS token anymore. Last time, when you use the azcopy command to upload files or objects to storage account, we had to use the SAS token. We had to go to the container or the storage account, create the SAS token and use that SAS token in the URL using the azcopy command. Now that would not be needed because we'll be using managed identity. So we have this Azure VM, which is one service, and then we have another service, which is storage account or Azure storage service. And we'll be using the storage account container because we want to upload objects and we'll have to use Azure container to store blob storage. Now here I'm showing you the demo using basic services like Azure VM and a storage account, but the setup and the process would be similar even if you use other services like from Azure VM to SQL database, Microsoft Fabric to storage account, etc., or Microsoft Fabric to ADLS, etc. So these are the two services, and what we have to do is that we'll have to create the managed identity entity separately. So we'll have to create this, and after creating, we'll have to perform a few steps. In the first step, what we'll have to do is that we'll have to associate the managed identity with the Azure VM. What this association would do, it would make the managed identity as the identity of the VM. So using this, we are giving this non-human entity an identity. So that's what a managed identity is. So that's why we'll have to associate this. Now, after the association is done, we'll have to make sure that the identity is allowed to access storage account. And that is something we have already done using RBAC. So we'll have to allow access in the storage account from managed identity. That's all we have to do. And after that, we'll be using azcopy command, but with a little bit of twist because it is a separate tool. So we'll have to make sure that azcopy understands that we are using managed identity. So that's why we'll have to provide this azcopy login dash dash identity, which will pick up the managed identity and use that to authenticate and authorize in storage account. If you are using applications, if you are writing codes using Python, .NET, Java, etc., there are SDKs available which can be used to associate or assume the managed identity by the application. Only then the application would be able to communicate with the other service. In this case, it is the storage account. Now let's do that one by one. First, I'll be creating the managed identity, and here you'll get it in the identity section, which is this one. And here you'll see managed identities. So let me go ahead and create a managed identity here. This is very simple, just like creating any other resource, but without too many other things. This is the name, and I'll have to provide the proper region, and that's it. We do not have anything else. We can provide the tags and then we can review and create. That's it. We are not using anything as such. You see, we are not assigning any roles. We are not using any role assignments also in this managed identity. So it is just an entity without having anything. And this is the identity that has been created. Now what we have to do is that we'll have to go to the first service which will use this managed identity. In our case, that would be the public VM. So let's go to the public VM, and here we'll have to make sure that we assign the managed identity to this public VM. Now it's a little different. We cannot use networking or anything as such. We'll have to scroll down. Then we have this security, and inside of security we have identity. So we'll have to use this identity, and there are two options. One is the system assigned, the other one is the user assigned. Now, what is system assigned managed identity? In this case, this managed identity would be restricted to this particular resource only. So if we switch it on, then in that case, the MI or the identity that would be created will only be valid within the Azure VM or within this particular VM. That MI or managed identity cannot be used anywhere else. That's why user identity is way better, because we can not only assign it to one resource, we can assign the same identity to other resources also. Now here I can add this identity, which is this one. Click on add, and once it is done, what we are telling Azure or what we are telling Azure VM, that this is the managed identity that you should use. So we are just assigning or giving this server or this VM an identity. That's it. nothing else. So the VM has got the identity. Now we'll have to make sure that this identity is allowed to access storage account. Now, one more thing is that because it is an user assigned identity, this MI can be associated with other resources also. For example, the same MI can be associated with Microsoft Fabric or Azure Synapse or anything of that sort. So it can be associated with other resources also, which is not possible using system assigned ID or system assigned identity. Now let's go to the storage account, and in that storage account we'll have to make sure that this particular identity has the access. So this is the storage account, and now what we'll have to do, I'll be using RBAC, so access control IAM, and here we have role assignments, and we'll have to add the role assignment. Right now I have only this particular role, which is the owner. I have removed the other user. Now I'll be adding a role assignment just like RBAC. Now let's select the storage account built-in role. Of course, I'll not be using any custom role. I have not created any custom role. Now, which role you want to select, that would depend on your use case. I'm selecting this storage blob data contributor, which allows for read, write, and delete access to Azure storage blob containers and data. The reason I'm selecting this because I'll be using the azcopy command to upload a file in the storage account. So for that I need write access. That's why I'm using this storage blob data contributor role. Now let's click on next, and then you have managed identity, and then let's select the members. So I'll be selecting the user assigned managed identity, and this is the only identity that I have created so far. That's it. Click on next and click on next and review plus assign, and then I have used RBAC to associate or to provide access to this managed identity from the storage account. Now this is an RBAC operation that we have done in the storage account, but the MI or the managed identity configuration was done in two steps. First I had to create the MI, then I had to associate the MI with the source resource, which is the VM. All right, now let's upload a file in the container of this storage account without using SAS token. So there are so many files here. These are the files that I had uploaded earlier. Now I'll be using the public VM to upload the file. And this is the name of the file, user managed ID underscore file.txt. And I'll be using azcopy. But I cannot use azcopy directly. First, I'll have to tell azcopy that you have to use the managed identity to authenticate and authorize to storage account. Earlier, when we used to upload, we were using this particular string, right? This is the SAS token. Now we do not have that. So that's why we'll have to use azcopy login command and followed by dash dash identity to make sure to tell azcopy that go ahead and use the managed identity associated with this VM. Now you see it provides the info that login with identity succeeded. Now I can use only azcopy copy command without using the SAS token to upload the file. It got completed. Now let's look at the authentication. It says authenticating to destination using Azure AD. Now, why it is using Azure AD? Because the managed identity that we created, that was part of Azure AD. So that's why the authentication was done and the authorization was also done. And this file, which is user managed ID file.txt, should be available in this storage account. And as you can see, it has been uploaded, right? So this is how we can use managed identity or user-based managed identity to perform service-to-service authentication and authorization. So this is where I conclude as Azure Essentials. And just a high-level summary, I had talked about Azure Virtual Network, which is the networking service provided by Azure. Then I talked about Azure VM, which is virtual machine or virtual server in Microsoft Azure Cloud. Then one of the most important service which is needed for data engineering and AI/ML engineering is Azure Storage. There are different types of storage. We talked about blob storage, ADLS, table storage, queue storage, etc. But we'll be using mostly blob storage and ADLS. If needed, we'll be using the other storages also. Then finally, I concluded the course with Azure Security. I talked about Azure RBAC, managed identity, and service principal. That's all so far. Thank you so much.